Hello everyone, Rob here. So, one of the great truisms of the Middle Ages is this idea that priests, monks, bishops, and other clergy would fight in combat, but would be required to use blunted weapons, things like maces, warhammers, anything that doesn't actually pierce the skin, because there was a prohibition against them shedding blood. Now, the question is this a true notion? Is this something that actually happened historically? The answer, no. Nope, not true at all. There you go. You can shut off the video right there, but don't, because I'm going to explore this a little bit more deeply. So I looked into contemporary sources, and honestly, I could not find any. Now, that is just me and my personal limitations. Perhaps there is some source, something in Old French or Old German or Old English possibly even, which I can't speak at all, and honestly, I don't have any particular inclination to learn. Any case, I could find no actual sources from the Middle Ages that describes this in any particular manner. So, where did this particular notion come from? Now, the idea of clerics and clergy using blunted weapons has carried over to the current day. In the Dungeons and Dragons universe, clerics use blunted weapons. In the Warhammer universe, there's the warrior priests who use giant hammers. Now, I know that's because, Sigmar, and all that stuff. There's a lore reason for it, but, still the idea that there's a cleric who is using a blunted weapon. Now, before we dive into this any deeper, we have to establish, did clergy fight during the Middle Ages? And the very short answer is, well, yes, they did. Now, the church authorities did try to suppress this. They really did try to discourage and actually did outright ban their clergy from participating in warfare with varying degrees of success. And by varying degrees of success, I mean it failed pretty much utterly. This was due to a combination of factors. In some places, like the Holy Roman Empire, the territory was actually governed by a cleric or a member of the clergy, in this particular case, a prince bishop, who would be in charge of certain regions as the secular ruler, and with that came military responsibilities. They could also have been motivated by some form of religious zeal. For example, there's the Danish bishop Absalon, who was a leading military figure during the Wendish campaigns in the Northern Crusades, and he was one of the leading figures of that particular military campaign. Also, you have to remember that clergy are in fact people, and maybe some of them just enjoyed taking sword and or mace and or whatever to someone's head because, hey, it's fun, why not? So we've established that clergy did in fact fight, but did they use blunt weaponry to prevent the spilling of blood? Now the question is, do maces and warhammers actually prevent the spilling of blood? And I would test this. There's really nothing better than a hands-on test for these sorts of things, but I don't have a mace or warhammer actually available to me. If there's only some way you guys can help me out with this. So given that an actual weapons test is unavailable, I'm going to have to do the next best thing. Now, last time I checked, the human fist is a blunt object, and still, combat sports that involve striking, such as boxing or MMA, are replete. They are filled with bloody, battered people. Cuts are commonplace. Really, blunt force trauma can absolutely break the skin. So a mace or a warhammer, like you would see here, would most certainly break the skin and cause the shedding of blood. So in a very literal sense, the shedding of blood is absolutely possible with a blunt weapon. Perhaps the idea of spilling blood and clergy not being allowed to spill blood is not to be taken in a literal sense, but rather in a metaphorical sense. People of the Middle Ages most certainly understood concepts like metaphor and hyperbole and things of that nature, and perhaps the idea of not shedding blood means that clergy were not allowed to take lives, were not allowed to commit violent acts, especially in terms of warfare, and that would be left for other parts of society. Now, like I said earlier, the church did try to suppress clergy from actually participating in warfare directly with mixed results, and like I said before, mixed results means it pretty much failed and clergy would fight constantly. But there is one other thing that I can talk about that would finally put an end to this idea of clerics not being allowed to shed blood. Now, what you see here is an early symbol of the Knights Templar, a Catholic organization, a monastic order, and they, along with the Knights Hospitaller, the Knights of Santiago, the Teutonic Knights, and others, were more than happy to use swords and axes and spears and other sorts of piercing weapons. Now, you see here these two guys on horseback. They are wielding spears, and they are ready to shed blood. Now, the Templars themselves and the other monastic orders were, in fact, monks. They were monks before they were warriors. Their organization was organized along the lines of the Benedictine order, with some, minor changes due to the nature of what they were doing. But yes, they were, in fact, monks, and as monks, they were a form of clergy. And I have personally not found anything in any of their founding documents or any sort of rules set by the Templars or any sort of decrees from the papacy or anything of that nature that shows that they are somehow exempt from this ban on shedding of blood. That's just simply not mentioned at all. Now again, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but still, I couldn't find anything. Again, that might just be my personal limitations, but I really highly doubt it at this point. So if there's no evidence of this particular ruling, and if it doesn't work in a practical sense, where did this particular idea come from? Well, it all probably started with this guy, Odo, the Bishop of Bayeux. You can see him here holding a staff or possibly a club. He's urging on a group of Norman horsemen at the Battle of Hastings. This is probably the root of the idea of clergy not being allowed to use sharpened weaponry. And from this small seed came that idea, which spread throughout the rest of history and had become commonplace even to the modern day. While it is possible that he is using this club as a weapon in combat, more than likely it is actually a symbol of authority. Batons are used as symbols of authority even to modern day. Just look at a conductor of an orchestra. The baton is a way to direct people, to move them around battlefields. They're pretty visible and is a sign of one's status as a commander or a leader of some kind. And this particular image was taken out of context and is the genesis of this particular myth. Now, I'm going to be going on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's really sort of related. I want to talk about history and how it was viewed throughout time. Specifically, I want to talk about the Victorians and how they viewed history. Now, it is very difficult, if not outright impossible, to get rid of any sort of bias when someone writes about history. There's always going to be some sort of preconceived notions. There's going to be some kind of point that somebody's going to make. But generally speaking, scholarship today, and I use that term very loosely, scholarship today wants to be as neutral as possible, give an accurate account of what happened in the past. The Victorians, and others before them too, but mostly the Victorians, wanted to prove a point of some kind. Now, the Victorians often portrayed the Middle Ages as being very backwards, very barbaric, as a way to show that society has advanced beyond that, and that they are better off than they were in the past. This was especially true in Protestant Britain, where they wanted to show that the Catholic Church, especially in that particular era, was corrupt and in some way morally deficient. Let's just leave it at that. Now, obviously, getting bludgeoned to death with a hammer or a mace is, well, you're just as dead as if you were stabbed to death with a sword or a spear. Now, historians in the Victorian era were happy to point this out as a sign of the hypocrisy of the church, that, they're willing to let people kill, but they're not willing to let them actually shed blood. And, well, that's just absurd. Now, the people in the Middle Ages would not have had the same technology that we do. They wouldn't have had the same communications devices that we have, or anything of that nature, but they were not stupid people. They would have absolutely have seen hypocrisy of this idea that you can kill somebody, you can bludgeon them repeatedly in the head with, a blunt object, but as long as it doesn't pierce their skin, it's somehow acceptable. They would have most certainly seen the hypocrisy in that, or the contradiction. This was a way for the Victorians to show how enlightened they supposedly had become in comparison to their earlier ancestors who, well, were under the control of what they deemed to be a corrupt church. All right, so to sum up, first off, there is no contemporary evidence of anything about priests or clergy not being allowed to use sharpened weaponry. There is no possible way that a mace or a warhammer would not shed blood. I mean, yeah, a fist will shed blood. Yes, a mace is going to do the exact same thing. And the church sponsored very prominent groups, the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Knights of Santiago, the Teutonic Knights, there's a bunch of others. They were more than happy to use sharpened weaponry. They were allowed to do so, and they were monks. They did. That's just how it is. So when it comes right down to it, a lot of what we know about history comes from previous generations who didn't necessarily have the truth or facts in mind, but rather their own personal perceptions and their own ideology that they wanted to put forward. There's a lesson in there. All right, thank you for watching. Please hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this and found it at least somewhat informative. More videos will be coming out, let's just be honest, whenever I get around to it. See you next time. Have a good day. Or don't have a good day. You're an adult. Make up your own decisions. And if you're not an adult, well, I can't help you there. Have a good day.